From the back of a U-Haul to a bag worth 30 pieces of silver, this is Tales from Weimerica's Hot Mic Episode 8. Coming right off the heels of last week, I was talking about how cowards don't go to heaven. Well, it seems like now more than ever is a time that we have an opportunity to not be cowards. Last week we saw a bunch of people from Patriot front, whether they were feds or not, going out there to demonstrate against pedophilia and sodomy, transsexualism, and child grooming, and immediately being shut down by the police. Whether they were feds or not is beside the point. Even if they were feds, they were putting on the airs of going against this. The implication is that if they were feds and the police shut them down just like that, they're demonstrating that now we will not tolerate people going against our ideology of molesting children. After this happened, a video just recently released inside the U-Haul showing the moments that the back door was open and the police were there to catch them. The very first thing said when the door opened was a cop looking at these guys and saying, "You picked the wrong day to riot." Now, riot about what and who's rioting? The book of Isaiah 5:20 says, "Woe unto them that call evil good and good evil, that put darkness for light and light for darkness, that put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter." There were the police outside. Two sides of this situation. One of them, a bunch of sodomites who do nothing but illustrate and live the epitome of nihilism, the epitome of death. And on the other, people who, whether or not real or imagined, were out there to go against this. Never before, I'm pretty sure, has the Patriot Front ever actually done anything close to rioting. If I'm not mistaken, their tactic usually is to march in silence. And yet there they were being greeted by police in armor, with all their riot gear, with pistols drawn. Right after this, we just had another situation where a guy from Washington State who had been putting things on the internet, making hate comments on the internet, simply quoting biblical truth, Bible verses, and calling things like they are, being thrown in jail now for felony hate crime charges. You don't come here for me to report to you the breaking news. You can go to other places and get that more effectively. Here I want to point out context and put things into perspective. The official charges against Tyler Dinsmore, who was arrested for this, was civil rights malicious harassment with a hate crimes enhancement. I'm only going to mention this once because I want to go into detail about why we need to stop arguing this way. For all intents and purposes, according to the Constitution, he was perfectly within his right to say everything he wanted to say. Nothing he did was illegal, and it was protected by the Constitution. But after arguing constitutional this and amendment rights that for how many years, how far has that gotten any of us? It's gotten a lot of people thrown in the back of a police car and now being charged for felony hate crimes. You need to stop crying about your amendment rights because people like Tyler Dinsmore and the 20 people who were caught in the back of a U-Haul van trying to protest against sodomites molesting kids can tell you that your amendment rights don't exist. Talking about your First Amendment right to gather and protest or to have freedom of speech or your Eighth Amendment right to not have cruel and unusual punishment won't keep you out of a solitary confinement cell indefinitely while they put you on some stupid sham kangaroo trial. The Eighth Amendment also says there should be no excessive bail and no excessive fines. Tyler Dinsmore, despite the fact that he didn't put a hand on anybody, has his bail set at $1 million for saying something. The right against cruel and unusual punishment didn't keep the McMichaels and their doofus neighbor from getting federal murder charges and the guy who was holding the camera being lumped in with it simply because he was another white guy who needed to be crucified to make an example out of other people. It didn't keep him, who was just there holding the camera, getting federal hate crime charges. And it didn't keep the district attorney from getting reined in on some bullshit charge too, just because she was affiliated and touched the unclean. In a very Jewish sense of spiritualism, it's like that. The DA simply was there, around the crime of racism. She touched the unclean meat, and therefore she's just as guilty too. She needs to be thrown in and sacrificed just along with them. The main people trying to gatekeep the right wing into doing this stupid amendment right argument mainly are conservatives who, I've already said, are not considered right wing. They want to keep going with this idea that because on a piece of paper written in ink 250 years ago that you should do this or shouldn't do that, almost as if it was a commandment to God. They want to play make-believe because in their mind the Constitution is next to the Bible, that the amendment rights are the same thing and hold the same weight as the Ten Commandments. Thou shalt not do this, and thou shalt not do that. The entire goal of what they're doing is to keep us believing that we have some kind of friend on the inside of the government to protect us, and that friend is a piece of paper, incapable of picking up a gun, raising an army, or protecting our children from other people. That's who they want you to believe is our friend on the inside. Well, the truth is, there is no friends on the inside. The police protecting the foreigner, the evildoer, those who have no desire for peace or good things in their heart, and arresting those who are good, who are defending the truth, who are defending their own people, even the people that these police officers represent in their own skin color, this is nothing new. I was listening to some old radio podcasts on some news articles and events that aren't even covered anymore. If you were to search these things on the internet, you would come up with nothing, at least in one of the two cases. The one event you might be able to find a little bit of information on was the year 2000 Puerto Rican Day parade event in New York. Mass rapes of white women by Puerto Ricans and blacks. The police were told to stand down. They did nothing to stop it. Now, of course, nobody considers journalists to be our friends on the inside, but it should be no surprise when I tell you that none of this was covered in the actual newspapers, that it was a rape against white people primarily, and because two non-whites slipped in there, this had nothing to do with targeting white women. The second event was the year 2000 Biloxi Black Spring Break. You will find only one thing on the internet regardless of the browser you use. It's from the SPLC saying that it didn't happen, and even if it did happen, if you complain about it, you're racist and you're evil. Now, the first adjective of racist, I don't think that charge should be something you should be ashamed of. You see, up until the time of Trotsky, the charge of racism didn't exist. It was called basic biological common sense. You stick with your own because it's as simple as looking at them that they are your racial kin. But Trotsky came along and relabeled this basic biological impulse as something you should be ashamed of because you have something intact. And anybody who's a racist, who thinks that because the outrageous idea that a group of people who look like you, speak the same language, share the same culture for 1,000 years and have the same blood, possibly even share family members across multiple generations ago, is somehow backwards. Believing that they have something in common with you is backwards, and you're a hick and you're stupid if you believe these things. That's what the charge of racist is implying. You see, the white man's flaw in this aspect is his pride. Because what being called a racist does, what it's implying is that the person is calling you stupid. Now, if you fear being called stupid, you're prideful. If you fear extinction, you're healthy. I would call you mentally healthy. The people who view being called stupid and backwards more so than they fear being extinct, being a foreigner in their own nation that their fathers had created, they're the most mentally backwards people who have ever lived of any generation before us. For the sake of getting the truth out there, for the sake of keeping things from being forgotten, I'm going to play a soundbite from William Pierce's report on the Biloxi Black Spring Break mass rapes and general unrest, and of course the police response to it.
2 months ago, for example, black college students had their so-called Black Spring Break 2000 celebration in Biloxi, Mississippi. Approximately 20,000 young blacks congregated in the Biloxi and Gulfport area, generally behaving as we expect 20,000 young blacks to behave when they have the local law enforcement agencies overwhelmed. They ate in restaurants and walked out without paying. They smashed up convenience stores when the storekeepers ran out of beer. One unhappy white storekeeper complained, "My bathrooms are ruined. I didn't believe people could be so mean and ugly." Well, I hope you believe it now. Other whites were shocked to see blacks pulling down their pants and relieving themselves on the sidewalks. The real black behavior, however, manifested itself when white women and girls who didn't have the sense to stay indoors, or in some cases were caught going to or from their places of employment, were spotted by the blacks. The cry would go up, "There's a white girl, get her!" Then exactly the same thing would happen that happened in Central Park. The unfortunate white girl would be mobbed by blacks, her clothes would be ripped from her body, and she would be fondled and probed while other blacks gleefully watched and videotaped her humiliation. There were even photographs in the local newspapers of stripped white girls running from the mob and trying to cover their nakedness with their hands while the blacks leered at them and made obscene gestures. But these Mississippi newspapers, just like those in New York, carefully avoided describing what happened in racial terms. Well, anyway, my point was that you didn't hear about what happened in Biloxi 2 months ago unless you happened to live there. I got my information from the Gulfport, Mississippi Sun-Herald, but it certainly wasn't in the Washington Post or the New York Times.
The more things change, the more they stay the same. And it's the same as it ever was. This last week has also been very eye-opening for the last remnant of the people who think that conservatism is right-wing or something worthy to be called an ally. Whether it's watching the George Floyd riots and doing nothing, whether it's arresting people for the January 6th protest and holding them indefinitely in solitary confinement, or now whether it's arresting people who are there to counter-protest sodomites, transsexuals, groomers, pedophiles, whatever you want to call them, the conservative once again shows his true colors in defending the police and siding with them against people who are trying to do good. Or at least, as I've said, making airs and appearances to do good. If you go on Facebook, Twitter, Gab, anywhere you can find boomer conservatives, you'll find a common denominator in all of their bios. They seem to love the word patriot. They'll never call themselves a nationalist, but they will call themselves a patriot. What's the difference? Well, I think I figured it out. Nationalism is as obvious as looking at someone and recognizing that they're part of your tribe, your nation. Nationalism is looking at another person who shares your blood, your heritage, your culture, your language, and your faith, and knowing they're a part of your nation, your tribe. It's very clear that a nationalistic impulse does not apply to people who are foreigners. Conservatives do not like this. You can tell this because they're always celebrating when female minorities and other people who are the based conservative minority, the based brown person, take some kind of place in a representative position in our government. They celebrate that someone who vaguely shares their ideas takes the place instead of celebrating when someone who looks like them and shares their culture takes this place instead. Patriotism is closer to civic nationalism. Patriotism is the support of your country, whatever that means when you don't have a border or any culture or any race or anything tying things together, any binding principles. When you have some vague border, some vague sense of land, and some constitution tying it all together, you could be a patriot and celebrate that regardless of who's there. Patriotism is being proud of an ideology or some vague idea, rather than being proud of your nation, your tribe, something that is inherent in your blood and in your person. You can't change it. What was the communist idea? The communist ideal. The Marxist ideal in the Soviet Union was that there was no such thing as identity of a person, no such thing as identity based on race. This is why they moved Russians into Ukraine, Ukrainians into Kazakhstan, Uzbekistans into Crimea, whatever. They touted an ideal binding people together that was communism or Marxist, cultural Marxism, rather than race and tribe. They did everything possible to dismantle it. Does that sound familiar? Civic nationalism is able to be called patriotism. That is civic nationalism. A people not unified by identity of biology, but unified by ideology. This is why conservatives are able to support police and soldiers time and time again after they get fucked over, because the truth is, whether you're conservative or leftist, you are marching forward with civic nationalism, and the police are there every step of the way enforcing it. They're enforcing, they are, in a roundabout sense, true patriots. If it isn't obvious yet, conservatives are not your ally. Every step of the way, they've done everything in their power to undermine those who are considerably right-wing, who stand for people, for place, for race, for faith. They undermine them at every step, and they're dead weight that needs to be cut out of what is considered right-wing. Don't deal with them. If you want a strong tea, you don't dilute it with water. Now that could be considered people who are sort of right-wing. But when it comes to conservatives, you don't make your tea better by putting holes in your glass, which is what conservatives seem determined to do when they call the cops on people showing up to protest, or in the case of many boomers on Gab who are conservatives and ostensibly conservatives. They seem absolutely hell-bent on doxing people, on trying to call them out and get the cops called to their house, on swatting them, whatever. One such example is one real piece of work called the Rogue Nation Eternal Militia. Go look him up on Gab. He's some conservative boomer who has all the markings of it. I don't know what the fuck it is with conservatives and the Punisher, but they always use it as some sort of iconography for themselves. The Punisher, someone who's vaguely good, but not really. They see themselves as showing up to dispense justice against who they see as leftists. And who do they see as leftists? After the pictures and mugshots came out of the Patriot Front members who came out to counter-protest against sodomites, this guy, Rogue Nation Eternal Militia, whose bio, whose little global thing says fighting Nazis on Gab on this particular post. Patriot Front mugshots, he said, as he posted all of their pictures of people trying to stop sodomites. Nazis are just another shade of communists. Make these hashtag douchebags famous. I can go into how painfully retarded the statement of Nazis are just another shade of communists is. I could go into that. Not right now. The important thing is that word, that eternal word that's always there for some reason. Nazis. Do you know what some of the core non-negotiable beliefs of the National Socialist Party of Germany was? The NSDAP platform had core values of destroying profiteering, preserving borders, preserving your people from foreign threats in every sense, preserving the integrity of the voting system that only the people of your tribe should vote in the tribe's government system, abolition of unearned income, and to protect mothers and children. These are non-negotiables of any decent ideology. If your party or your allies don't have every single one of the things I just said as non-negotiables, as in there is no exception to this and we're not going to bend about it, your group is completely worthless. The problem with the Nazi narrative that the minute you see the word Nazi, this is something that needs to be dismantled. The problem is any decent group will have these non-negotiables and you have some kind of ground to compare it to the National Socialist Party. These conservatives who stand for nothing, because if these values aren't something considered non-negotiable and good, you cannot ally with these people. They'll undermine you, they'll destroy your movement. They serve as agents of destruction for your nation. When they see something that vaguely resembles a National Socialist, they jump back at it like they see a rattlesnake coiling up to strike them. Conservatives are the kinds of people who, for seeing you guilty of the sin of wanting to protect your own people over outsiders who have done nothing but steal, take, rob, rape, murder, for the sin of that, they'll threaten you over social media and say they'll kill you for constitutional egalitarianism, something that didn't even exist in the original Constitution, for as flawed as it was. They are not your friend. They're dead weight that needs to be cut. They see ideals that are unmistakably right-wing. And because they have it in their head that National Socialists are communists, they'll sit at your table that's considered right-wing if you let them, and they'll point the finger at the person furthest to the right on the table and say they're a leftist. And like a 3-year-old, they'll plug their ears and say, la 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 la, I don't want to hear it, la la la, I can't hear you. They are obnoxious, gatekeeping destroyers. They are obnoxious and do nothing but serve the enemy for pulling us further left. Because what is a conservative at the end of the day? Someone who wants to conserve the system, okay? They're not conserving the Constitution as it was originally intended, because if they were doing that, they would be out there protesting that citizenship is only available to people who are of white, good character, and free men who are not indentured servants or slaves. But they're not doing that, because they're not conserving the original idea of America. Not even that I agree with the premise that the original idea of America is a good thing, but the point is, that's not what they're conserving. They're conserving this strange Jewish invention that came about after World War II when America became a golem for them. When they passed Hart-Celler and these boomers were growing up in the consumerist paradise of America, where they were growing up having sex with people they weren't married to, taking LSD and smoking pot all day. That's the conservative's dream. That's what he looks back on with fondness, and he wants to take you back to that. He wants to take you back to the beginning of the sexual revolution, instead of the end of it, the results and the products that he's made. Not that he necessarily thinks that they're a bad thing. After all, does the conservative not celebrate, we have women in the workplace too. We're not sexist. We're not racist. We want equality for all. Does he not celebrate that at every step of the way? Everything that is good, everything that is righteous, everything that places things where they belong in the proper category so that they can function best, so that they can function most efficiently, the conservative says is bad. He gets indignant when he sees a leftist not taking leftism far enough. How many times have you seen it? Leftists are the real racists. Leftists are the real sexists. Leftists are mean to black people and they say that they're really for them. He gets angry when the opposition isn't emboldened enough, so he feels the necessity inside of his heart to galvanize his opposition and instead go after his own supposed allies on the right wing who are out there to protest against sodomites. The conservative is invested in flipping things on its head just as much as the leftist is. The only difference is the conservative wants to live long enough so that he doesn't have to live in the hell he's created for himself. Even though the ideas that led them there, even though the ideas that led us here are something he refuses to call bad, is something that to the grave he will take and say, these are virtues above all else. Egalitarianism, equality, anti-racism. Woe unto them that call evil good and good evil, that put darkness for light and light for darkness, that put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. I want to remind you all, in light of what happened to Tyler Dinsmore, arrested on felony hate crime charges just for speaking the Bible truth, that anonymity online is a weapon that we're not going to have for much longer. I advise that you use it. Keep secure your anonymity online for as long as you can. In real space, create friend groups. Foster little communities where people can understand the value of relying on people in their own tribe. But online, keep your anonymity close and secure. This guy has felony hate crime charges for posting biblical truth online. Something we used to make fun of Britain for 2 years ago. This has been Tales from Weimerica's Hot Mic, Episode 8. Hail Christ, hail victory.